Cool. So let me share my screen real quick. Cool. So kind of following up on what Austin was talking about regarding his work with trying to test environments. I wanted to test or create a test for in user testing to try and get feedback on the idea of where members should exist in the navigation. So we have obviously its default location here. This ties in to the work that Kat and Michael Lay have been doing in regards to trying to clean up the navigation. And so I wanted to see if it makes sense to move this somewhere else. Also, it ties into the work that we want to do with bringing the self-managed environment user admin screen into the .com environment. So I thought, okay, well, I'll make a simple test and ask users where do they think they would find members. The idea being that I would use like a simple generic visual just to say, okay, take a look at this and tell me what you think or where you would go to find group membership. So what I actually learned is that it's actually harder to screen for participants than it is to get feedback on this task. The idea that I had set up 2 initial tests where I would get participants to just basically look at this and say, what do you think? The problem here, I have to create a screener. So let's go here and I'll show the screener. Let's see. Just one second. Oh, it's not working. Well, I'll do it here with the screen. So when you start out on user testing, it gives you kind of just a generic screen, and you have to go through and pick what sections or fields of the screening process you would want to go through. And so this is kind of the start. It was suggested to me that we would probably start with telecommunications and technology and internet. And from here, you would create a screener question. And this is where the problem started coming up. So what I did here was I wanted to have 2 different iterations of the test. So I wanted to ask current GitLab users what they would think about where they would find membership. And then I wanted to ask participants who were not necessarily GitLab users where they would find the members. So I started by adding types questions here about what sort of environment that they currently use in their DevOps. So I would put in like GitHub, Atlassian, and all these other sort of competitors to try and just have a range or a scope. And then I would say this is, they would be able to select more than one answer, or they could only select one answer. And so in the first iteration for this test, they could only be GitLab users. And so that was one option. The second was they could be not GitLab users. So instantly I got immediate feedback on the not GitLab users. Let's go to, I'll show you here. So this was any DevOps user, and I got 10 out of 10 participants answered in one day. So that was great. I can move on to the second test. The first test, oh, cool. I got 2 more people just now. Excellent. It took me 2 weeks to get 2 people to answer. And so I changed the test to allow not just specifically GitLab users, but to allow them to actually use GitLab and any other environment. So because it was a little too restrictive before, still can't find it. I think they've changed it for me. So yeah, this is now a little bit more complex because I've gotten my answers. I've gotten my participants for this restrictive screener that I had done. But because I've had to go back and change the screening process, I don't really feel confident in it. Like I said, I just now got 2 more members over in 2 weeks. So this led me to think about, well, is there another way of doing the screener? So for example, maybe the screener should be a bit more interactive. So instead of asking just to have an automated approval, once they answer the questions, to say, please fill in your answer. What would you say is the DevOps environment that you use? Because then I could actually get a qualified answer. And the reason I wanted to do this is because it leads me to the next problem, was that the responses that I have gotten so far are kind of strange. There's a few that really stick out as like, I don't think they're actually DevOps people or people in the IT industry. And this is the next point of my problem of this screener, is that I'm wondering are these screeners or participants actual people in the industry, or are they somebody like my father who actually takes these every day, all day long, and just answers the questions and gets through? And so I'm thinking maybe that this screener part might actually be more useful, to be more interactive, having to go back and see what they provide as feedback for the answers. And I think that would help qualify or get better results on some of these interviews that I've received so far. And so that's the next step, kind of where I was going to look at here, is how do I then tailor this screener, adding different sorts of iterations of this. Right here, this one, the test frequency, Kat had told me about adding this as an option to maybe prevent folks like my father who just go in there and take screeners all day long randomly. And then also exclude participants from prior studies. So for example, this is a problem that I had encountered where if I was going to do another iteration of the test, like right here, 2B1 and 2B2, I didn't want the same person to come from 2B1 to answer again on 2B2. So excluding participants from prior studies was a really interesting thing that I could just turn on here and block them from that. So all this comes down to, I think this is not as simple as I thought it was, or as it was intended, or at least for me. I think the biggest problem is this going to be the screener and defining your screener for your tasks. I don't think I've had positive success using this. I'm not sure about anybody else, but again, this is kind of just a topic of my work that I've done, and I wanted to kind of just show a little bit of what was going on. That was it.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. I have the first question. If I understand how the industry field works, I wonder if we're excluding people who are in healthcare or transportation who do use technology products in their work, if we only select telecom and internet, or am I misunderstanding how that filters?
Yeah, that's something that I was trying to figure out when I first did this, is that I wanted to make sure that people weren't reviewing like sneakers and coffee. And I was like, okay, well, I want to see somebody who is part of the tech industry. And it was suggested to me to choose that option. I think one of the things that I had kind of reinforced that idea of choosing the IT or tech industry was something that Marcel had discussed in Slack just the other day, about looking at the other data points that user testing captures, like income, age, gender, these sorts of things. And it's like, okay, I can see how user testing is an environment for testing multiple things, which is kind of the point I made about like anybody can go in there and test anything and give feedback as long as they get through the screener. And so that's sort of what my assumption was. By choosing IT, I could probably narrow it down to the sysadmin profile that I wanted to look at. I would agree that that doesn't necessarily mean that people who are outside of that industry wouldn't be able to provide insight. I would like to have be as inclusive as possible and bring in anybody from any industry to answer that. And I'm thinking that's what goes back to the more interactive screener, by saying, yeah, just open it up to anybody, but then ask these very specific questions. Please tell me about your DevOps environment. Please tell me about your, your use case for these sorts of scenarios or whatnot. But I think in that case, I think the idea of user testing being a fast way to get answers might lose that appeal. But I'm happy to get more training or any sort of critique on that.
Becca, you have the next question.
Yeah, I'm just kind of laughing because I literally just went through the same thing with user testing, and it consumed a lot more of my time than I would have liked, for the same exact reasons. I mean, I launched a solution validation study on a security scanner status widget, and specifically wanted only participants who were either security professionals, security analysts, security engineers, or developers who are responsible for AppSec at their companies. and thought I wrote a pretty good screener with, disqualifiers in every response. However, after the first 3 participants, who were all under the age of 22 or under, I could tell that it was just, there are a lot of people in the candidate pool, participant pool, who are just on there to make extra money, and that the people that I actually want to speak to are probably not being, not trying to make extra cash on the side. So it was incredibly frustrating for me as well. User testing, however, was very responsive. And also Adam was incredibly collaborative with me in helping me try to find the right candidate. So a couple of things that I did without taking up too much time here is, one, we added an extra screener question. We added a roles question up front. And I added some roles at the top that maybe people who were just trying to make a buck would think would qualify them, but actually didn't. So I had like C-level executive as one of the first ones, and then like scientist, designer. So those were all disqualifiers. They had to select one of the developer roles or one of the security roles. So I think that helped. You can also, what else? Oh, you can like report one of, you can report a person who, wasn't articulate enough, not report them, but you can rank them. After you watch the video, it like asks you out of 5 stars, how would you rate this participant? I had to rate a couple of people as like 1 or 2 stars, and it asks me, do you want to replace this participant with someone else? And it just deletes the video. But so it's nice that it seemed like user testing was pretty responsive to that. When I said, no, this is not actually a qualified candidate, I like that they seem to be flexible there, even though we have this, I think, 10 user limit. And then the third thing here is, originally I wrote the research questions so that they were, tell me about your role. Is this a problem in your role? And if so, then does this solve that problem for you? Andy was an incredible help in helping me rewrite the scenarios. So even if these aren't security people, or maybe they are developers and don't have a ton of security experience, whether or not they could complete the scenario or the task that I gave them told me that this is a validated solution. And then when it comes to, how will you use this, and that more going into depth about context, that may be something that I need to not use user testing for. And then I also put in the agenda that when you do get a qualified candidate, be sure to add them to a panel if you want to use them in future tests. I think I only added 1 of my 9 participants to the panel, but I can see how in the future, the more that my team members and I add to that panel, the more that we'll be using reliable sources.
Yeah, that's everything I encountered, just +1. So yeah, I don't know if like I should have invalidated any of the respondents, because I don't have a strong feeling that yes, 100% they were not in the industry, but they were just weird answers sometimes and didn't really get it. So I didn't want to be too negative, but I definitely see the same problems.
Cool. This is a hot topic. Out of fairness to Alexis, I'm going to look at the time and move us along, but there's still a lot more to collaborate on around this. That's really good to hear.